For those of you who don't know me, my name's Elizabeth Rogers. I'm the CEO of Regional Arts New South Wales, and absolutely delighted to be part of this regional stakeholders gathering again for the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So welcome to session 4. I know you've had a really busy morning and, you know, the afternoon gets a little bit tiring, but I think you've got a really interesting series of presenters for this particular session, which is called Programming Differences. And we'll look at how museums have engaged with other sectors, and in particular the arts and from Bathurst, and a language-based research about the hearing impaired in Albury, and inviting young people through the education program to actually design programs for the museums. So I would first of all like to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon, Deusien, who I know very well because I commissioned him to direct the arts program for Artstate Bathurst. This is a 4-year project of Regional Arts New South Wales to demonstrate excellence in arts practice in regional areas. Bathurst was our second iteration. And when Adam is a theatre director and has won numerous awards and fellowships, which you can read in your program, I'm not going to go through. But what was really exciting for me was when he presented his draft program, that he'd actually engaged with the museums in Bathurst through a really interesting program of artists in residencies. So please welcome Deusien, and he will tell you what happened.
Hello everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's a great pleasure to be talking about this project and about Artstate more broadly, which only happened about 3 weekends ago, so I'm still on the end of reflecting on it all, and this is a program that I'm quite proud of. So today I'm going to be talking about the Museum Artist in Residency project that were part of the arts program for Artstate Bathurst that was just a few short weeks ago. Now, as Elizabeth mentioned, I come from an arts practice background. I'm a theatre director by trade, so my expertise doesn't particularly lie in the practice and processes of curating and collection and exhibition in museums, but I knew that when I started the gig of programming the arts program for Artstate that I wanted Bathurst museums to be an integral part and to be showcased as part of the arts program. As an arts festival programmer and director, and as an artist myself, I think it's probably pretty obvious that I'm a fierce advocate for the role that arts play in creating vibrant cultural ecologies and vibrant cities and communities. And so, because my expertise doesn't lie inside museums, I'm going to be talking a lot about the art, the artists and the artwork, because I think sometimes actual conversations about the artworks themselves are often omitted, but it's in the detail of the artwork and the artist and the process that actually it becomes quite, it's revealed. All the stuff is in details are revealed. So in order to do that, though, to talk about the works, I'm going to give you a little bit of more context about Artstate and about the museums in Bathurst. I'm going to talk about the rationale and the goals for the program, and then the subsequent design of the residencies. And then I'm going to talk about the artists and their work, and then discuss a few reflections about the key things that we learned, and also maybe a few key considerations that we're thinking about if you're thinking about engaging artists inside museum contexts. So, Artstate, what is Artstate? It's a 4-year project by Regional Arts New South Wales, supported by the state government that is, and I love this tagline, part conference, part festival, but all arts. It's designed to showcase the best in regional arts practice, and it houses a 2-day conference of keynotes, panels, breakout sessions, and robust conversation, as well as a 4-day program of arts and cultural activities that showcase the excellence in arts and culture across all forms, particularly in the host region. And that's important because Artstate bounces around between different regional centres. So, as Elizabeth mentioned, the first one was in Lismore. Of course, this year was in Bathurst, and next year it's in Tamworth. With over 250 delegates coming to Bathurst for the conference, Artstate was a real opportunity to celebrate the rich ecology of professional arts practice in the region. But something else I really wanted to do was reveal the burgeoning talent and great ambition of our young and emerging artists on this particularly national platform. And it was also a chance to invite community to revel in the locally made work of great quality and great rigour, and enjoy the great joy in putting forward locally created art and artists. So involving the museums unit in the arts program was a little bit of a no-brainer for me. We have a number of significant collections housed in our museums that are of certain significance. They are a major attraction for tourism and are much-loved cultural institutions by the Central West community. In Bathurst, we have a dedicated museums unit as part of Bathurst Regional Council, a number of whom are here today. So I want to give a very special shout out to Janelle Middleton, Penny Packham and Emma McLean, and the incredible work that they do in making sure that the Bathurst Museums are vibrant cultural attractions in the Central West. And thank you for your collaboration on this project. It was absolutely integral to the success of it. The three museums that we put artists in were the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum, which is located right in the centre of Bathurst and is home to the internationally renowned Somerville collection. I have definitely just copied and pasted all of this stuff straight from the website because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. So, you know, if it sounds familiar, if you go look up them later, you'll probably recognise some of these words. Anyway, the Somerville collection is a lifetime work of Warren Somerville AM and features some of the finest and rarest specimens of minerals and crystals and fossils from around the world. As a unique education resource, the building currently holds 2,000 fossil and mineral specimens, which are on display in two of the main exhibitions, the Fossil Gallery and the Mineral Gallery. The National Motor Racing Museum. Based on the foot of Wailu Mount Panorama, the National Motor Racing Museum celebrates the history, personalities and achievements of Australian motorsports. While Mount Panorama and the Bathurst 1000 is obviously at the heart of the displays, the collection looks across the spectrum of Australian motor racing. The history of speedway, solar, drag, rallying, open-wheeler, sports car, as well as touring cars is all told through the collection and throughout this museum. And the Chifley Home. Chifley Home at 10 Busby Street in Bathurst was the only residence of Prime Minister Ben Chifley and his wife Elizabeth. Today, this semi-detached terrace still contains its original collection of household furnishings and personal effects dating back to when the Chifleys first occupied the house in 1914. So these are the three museums that we wanted to put artists in order to showcase a number of things. So we considered a number of things when we were designing the residencies, and we had a number of goals that the museum unit and I kind of discussed. And these were to provide a commission for a number of local to the Central West professional artists to make a new original work which would have its premiere at Artstate, and we wanted to make sure that the selected artists represented the broadness of the arts practices across art forms in the Central West, and provide opportunity to both established and emerging artists, regional artists in particular, so a meeting of regional museums and regional artists. We wanted to showcase each of these museums as part of Artstate, given their significance and their significant contribution to the vibrant cultural ecology of Bathurst and the Central West. And we also wanted to create a new experience for the museum audiences, provided through the unique perspective and interpretation of the collection by each artist. So providing new ways into the collection through the unique voice of an artist. So we designed the project, and this is how we kind of conceived the artist would work. So each of the museums would have a resident artist who would be commissioned to make a new work in response to the collection. They were free to take inspiration from any part of it, and they had full agency to follow their own artistic intuition and interests and define themselves what would be the work that they would make, but it had to premiere as part of Artstate from the 1st to the 4th of November this year. They would have access to the museum and the staff and would work for about 6 months in the lead up to Artstate. Only the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum was inside the festival precinct for Artstate. So it's a really important part of the programming for the conference and festival that everything is within walking distance. So only the Fossil and Mineral Museum was in the precinct. The rest was definitely not within a walk. So that meant that only the artists going into the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum would have their work shown there. The other two outcomes needed to find alternate sites within the precinct that linked in with the idea that they were conceiving and going to consequently deliver. Because a number of the outcomes would be outside of the museums, we needed to encourage engagement with the museums by audiences. So each artist was also to hold a community engagement event of some type at the museum itself in the lead up to Artstate and then during the festival itself. So that's the bit of the context. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the work. So we paired up sculptor Harry Fasher with the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum. An immersive theatre maker, Penelope Kentish, was resident at the National Motor Racing Museum, and emerging artists Joanna Williams and Jessie Alston collaborated on new work inspired by the Chifley Home. So let's meet the artists and see the work that they did. So Harry Fasher, the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum, created a solo exhibition called Lines, Power of the Landscape. So Harry is an internationally renowned award-winning visual artist working primarily in sculpture, based in Oberon, which is about 40 minutes south of Bathurst. She is a recipient of the Helen Lempriere Scholarship in 2017 and Sculpture by the Sea's Rio Tinto Award at Cottesloe in 2018. Primarily, she produces large-scale steel sculptures that embody tension and movement, and you can see an example of this. This work wasn't made for her residency, but it was included as part of it, and funnily enough, that was actually supposed to be inside the gallery, but it took, I think, a number of hours of trial and error to realise it wasn't going to fit through the door. But I think it looks, oh, whoop, no, not there yet. I think it looks beautiful, and it's still out there in the courtyard today. So she utilises both abstraction and figurative form, predominantly using the horse to convey her message. She works primarily with steel. The sculptures are three-dimensional drawings that often elicit powerful emotional responses from the viewer. And the mental and physical power of the horse is core to Fasher's work, and it belies her history as an equestrian athlete. The work, though, that she created for her residency is a departure from this practice, or more accurately, in her own words, it's a return to the origins of her practice. For Lines, Harry was inspired to return to three-dimensional drawing incorporating found materials, which she describes as something that drew her to sculpture in the first place. She created an exhibition of numerous works, larger and smaller, and it's still there in the exhibition space right now. The exhibition was a hit at Artstate, as the Australian Fossil and Mineral Museum was in the precinct, it attracted many delegates who were interested not only in Harry's work, but in the museum itself. On the Sunday of the conference, Harry held an artist talk that was open to the community and to the delegates. That was well attended, and you can see here in this picture. That's Harry there at the front, in the hat and the shorts and the thongs, pretty typical Harry, which was a well-attended event. I asked each artist to jot down a few reflections about their process, primarily to share with you here today, and I think what's really interesting about Harry's is that it was quite a transformative and reflective experience for her. So these are her words about her experience. So my initial response to the collection in the museum was literal. As a result, I collected perspex to respond to the structures and colours of the minerals, and I made drawings of the museum's fossils. Whilst this initial response could well have been developed into a strong body of work, I delved deeper into what the museum meant and how the collection began, which is one man's connection to the landscape. She's talking about Somerville there. I investigated my relationship to landscape, and it is integral to my sense of self. It is from this point that the work in Lines, Power of the Landscape was developed. This residency has created space to explore the life force within the landscape and my own connection to it. The earth has an inherent power, and we each have an intimate relationship to this energy. And I think one of the great one of the great successes was giving this new way into looking at the Somerville collection and Somerville the man, as opposed to the objects being something she responded to. She responded to the act of collection that Somerville, and what that kind of meant. So not just collecting objects, but he was grabbing objects and collecting them from the land, and that was his expression of connection. So she took this idea and made work as part of that, as opposed to a literal response, which I think that connected back to her practice, which I think was really powerful in the resulting work. Next up, we had Penelope Kentish, who was at the National Motor Racing Museum with The Beast. Penelope Kentish is a Bathurst-based theatre maker who works frequently with young people. In 2011, she made work with her award-winning performance company Big One, Little One as a writer, director and performer. Last year, she directed 17 Things the Government Doesn't Want You to Know About the Internet, a co-production with Australian Theatre for Young People and Bathurst Memorial Entertainment Centre, which was devised and performed by 13 to 16-year-olds. She teaches drama with her youth theatre company Beloved Monster and is a sessional academic at Charles Sturt University. Her work is typically participatory and immersive, so it asks the audience to be participants and agents in their own experience of her performance work. So this combination of contemporary performance work and work with young people was an exciting proposition for the museum residency, and it provided a rich and challenging experience for the young artists that she chose to work with. So this is the team of university volunteers in the kind of pink, the young people in the black. Nell is standing next to, she's left, sorry, I got my left and right wrong. She's third in from the left, next to the guy in red. That is Ben Rodwell, who assistant directed with her. And they created an immersive performance experience with this ensemble of 15 to 17-year-olds. What they were inspired by in the museum was the idea of rivals. So they created an intimate, interactive show that was part puzzle, part sensory experience and part storytelling. And this is from their artist statement. Bathurst is known to most Australians as the home of the V8. It's the week-long car race in October, which attracts tens of thousands of car enthusiasts to Bathurst every year. But what is Bathurst to the adolescents of the town? What rivalries exist during race week that the punters don't see? And what they created was a museum. So what she discovered was that spending so many hours rehearsing with the young people and also with her creative team in the museum is that the questions about what is a museum came up as well. So what the audience experienced was this wacky, strange museum where in the first few moments of the play, well actually in the first few moments of the work, we were outside on these, the performers on the cars, spray painting these cars, and everyone knew that it was the National Motor Racing Museum residency. And I think you see a young person spray painting a car and just all these kind of things happen. And then at the end of the performance though, these are two cars actually from the collection at the Motor Racing Museum that came down from the show every night. That was a revelation at the end of the show when we went back outside. But once you were inside, you were divided into 6 groups of 4 to 5 people, and you were then led around the museum, and each room that you went to in turn had a different exploration of rivalry in some form. This was their interpretation of a wonderfully eclectic and eccentric museum curator, which was probably my favourite room in the whole one, and it was probably the most terrifying experience. He was banging doors, getting you to turn around, yelling at you, telling you that you didn't know enough to be there, and then wanting you to stay and see more. It was incredible. Maybe you guys know someone like this. Another favourite scene was when they fed us as well, because we had a little bit of a break, and then there was the rivalry that emerged between Doritos or Tim Tams. Amongst many others. But what I really love about this is their reflection. So this is coming from Nell's reflection. So it was difficult to engage our cast of 6 young people with the idea of including stories from the Motor Racing Museum. The cast of 15 to 17-year-olds were disinterested in sport, especially motorsport. As they've lived in Bathurst their whole lives, or they were born, or they've been there since their early childhood, they had these negative ideas of what the Bathurst 1000 is, and they felt negatively about motor racing culture in general, which is not like to. I've had this discussion a lot. There are people in town that love the Bathurst 1000 and that really love it, and there are people who don't, who for various reasons. So the cast were young people who were passionate about performance and internet culture, music and video games, and found it very difficult to transform motor racing stories into creative ideas that they could relate to. So it was a surprise to us all when the whole show ended up being set in the museum, but wholly exploring the idea of what curating museum collection and running museum as a whole could be, from the marketing materials, the type of staff that worked there, and it was a natural progression because they were spending time in the National Motor Racing Museum and then going to the rehearsal room, obviously asking the question, well, what is a museum? This is a note from Nell as well. As a director, the brilliant moment for me came when Penny Packham, Audience Engagement Officer of the Bathurst Regional Council Museums, sent a kind email the morning after opening night saying that the show reminded her of the essential questions of her role. And these questions are, what is a museum? What stories do we tell? How do we tell them? And why do we tell them? And I think for an artist to provoke those questions, or a reminder of those questions to a staff member of the museum, shows a certain level of effectiveness of the way artists can ask similar questions, but in a way that makes you think of the answer differently. The last work, Jessie Alston and Jesse Olsen and Joanna Williams were at the Chifley home, and their work was Homekeeper. So this work went through a number of iterations. Jesse and Jojo, that's Jojo on the left and Jesse on the right, were emerging artists who have just graduated from the Theatre Media program at Charles Sturt University. Jojo is a writer and a dramaturg, and Jesse is a digital artist. He does animation as well as audio work. And what they ended up creating, they responded to the idea of home in the Chifley home, like what it actually means to make a home. And they were looking at Elizabeth Chifley at first, and then they opened it more broadly. So what they did is they did a workshop in the Chifley Home Education Centre where I think they had about 12 people attend to make these replicas of their own houses or their dream homes. And they were interviewed about what does home mean to you, or do you have a story about your home? In the park was then, these homes were then installed in like a little mini town, but then those interviews that were recorded were then on these telephones. So you could stand there and listen to the actual story. And on the centre one, do I have a picture of it? You can, the one that this woman's on was actually a house that they made, which is a replica of the Chifley home, and was actually actors performing letters from Elizabeth Chifley and Ben Chifley. But also, during the actual, the outcome in the park, more participants could come and make your own smaller versions of the houses and contribute them. And then they were encouraged, so that the town kind of grew over the weekend. And then the artist was also present there, encouraged them to talk about home. So they weren't recorded, but the same conversations happened. There's the picture of Chifley. They also did a performance on the Sunday as well, as part of it. Now, I've been already given the 2-minute kind of mark, so it's probably time for questions. So it'd be really excellent if the first question was, hey Adam, what are some key reflections and considerations that you learned from this? So, but, you know, that's just a suggestion of a possible question. I'm asking permission to talk a little bit longer, I guess.
What are your key reflections?
What a great question. And I'll be quick with this. So by all accounts, the residents were a great success. They increased foot traffic, obviously, and there's all these stats that the wonderful museum unit have gathered. But I think as an artist, I'm definitely more interested in kind of the more conceptual and the engagement outcomes. So one of the great successes was impact on the artists. All 4 have remarked that it was a remarkable opportunity to reflect on their own practice and try something new and take creative risks in a space that they were really supported. And it was successful in finding new ways to interact with the stories that were already present, or reveal perhaps some of the smaller stories or the hidden stories inside the museums. But with that in mind, there's a couple of things that that I would consider going forward, and I think are useful reflections for you if you want to work with artists, is that the artistic process is emergent, non-linear, unpredictable, and it needs to stay that way. So any collaboration process with artists needs to make sure that there's enough structure to provide freedom to make work and take risks, but it's responsive to what's emergent, but it also is really important that the artists are aware of what is within the realm of possibility to achieve within resources, as in the arts and cultural sector, resources are so limited and definitely always run out. Expectations must be clear around what is the role of the artist and what is the role of the museum, and that got a bit muddy in our process. I think everything still happened, but ensuring that there is really active communication. And something that I reflect on is perhaps that my role as curating these artists could have been a bit closer with the artists. I could have been more of a conduit between the 2 different practices. Between curatorial practice as an artist or artistic process, and then the curatorial processes of museum and collection. They're distinct, they're different, and the differences will be different depending on the artist that you're working with. So making sure there's a kind of curatorial conduit that mitigates some of the problems with navigating those differences. So that's, yeah. I just came off the top of my head in response to that great question. Does anyone have any questions? I'm always terrible at that. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Yes, I'd also like to add my thanks to the fabulous staff at the Bathurst Museums unit, because it certainly was a risky process for them to engage with these very diverse and varying areas of skills and experience with these artists, and I'm really looking forward to getting the stats and the figures I needed for my reporting. The next person I would like to introduce is Emma Williams, and Emma is a museum curator at the Albury Library Museum, and she's going to talk about research that they've been doing about engaging with people from the hearing impaired community. Welcome. Welcome, Emma.
Hi everyone, and thank you very much for having me along today. Can everyone hear okay? Cool. So yeah, my name's Emma and I'm the curator at Albury Library Museum, and today I'm going to be talking about engagement of deaf and hard of hearing visitors in museums and galleries. This presentation really stems from a very small research project that I completed last year, which looked at language barriers for deaf and hard of hearing museum visitors. And it also really draws on Albury Library Museum's recent experience at the Australian Deaf Games, which was held in Albury-Wodonga earlier this year. Excuse me. So for those who don't know, Albury Library Museum is the first combined facility of its kind in Australia, opened in 2007, so we're now 11 years old and time's really flown, I would have to say. We offer a converged approach to the provision of library, museum, gallery and youth services. So we have physical and electronic library collections, we have a local studies collection, a social history collection, we have professional exhibition gallery spaces, we have a cafe and programming spaces and meeting spaces as well. So we've really become a community hub for our region, and depending on the year we generally get between 220 and 240,000 visitors each year. So those are quite good numbers for a facility like ours, and around about 70,000 of the people visit our exhibitions annually, so that's not bad at all. Being situated on the Victoria-New South Wales border does present its challenges. It also presents its challenges in the Auslan world, which is very interesting because you may or may not know that there is a northern and a southern dialect of Australian Sign Language. The northern dialect existing in basically Wagga up, and the southern, it really follows football. So if you're an NRL state, you're the northern dialect. If you're a AFL state, you're a southern dialect. And it's not a big, it's small differences, but there are lots of signs that mean one thing in one state and something else in another, and one of them is sexy. So it's just something that you need to know. And don't ask me which one's which, because I'll get it wrong. Despite being on the border, we really are very lucky to be in a very healthy arts and creative community. Albury Library Museum, the New Murray Art Museum, Albury, Artstate Wodonga, a number of private and artist-run galleries, and a really healthy number of volunteer-run historical societies and museums supported in large part by Kim Biggs over there, who suggested I do this presentation, so she's in trouble. We also have a really strong partnership with City of Wodonga Council, which is in Victoria, thanks to an agreement signed between our two councils. So that's just a little bit of context around the world that we're operating in. So obviously, we're all really passionate people, whether we're volunteers or paid staff. We obviously don't do what we do for money and accolades. And we work really hard to do what it is that we do, and we want what we do to be enjoyed by a broad range of people, whether that's a touring exhibition, a permanent exhibition, or a public program. We want it to be enjoyed by people with differing abilities, and those from different language backgrounds and different community backgrounds. And so the desire for me to investigate this topic and my institution to investigate this topic comes from a number of things. Firstly, the fact that the Australian Deaf Games was held in Albury-Wodonga in January this year. So this is a once every 4-year competitive sporting event for deaf people. It was held across a number of venues in Albury and Wodonga in January this year. I'll touch on that a bit later on in the presentation, but it's interesting to note that around about 300 people from our community attended introductory Australian Sign Language classes in the lead up to the Games, so our town really got on board with that. The second reason was a general increased focus on accessibility in the Library Museum more generally. So we're trying to make our facility more accessible to in a number of different ways. For example, we've been working with Vision Australia to get our facility to be more friendly for both our library spaces and our exhibition spaces to be more friendly to people with low or no vision. And we've done a number of exhibitions in the last 18 months where the exhibition labels have actually been available as audio described labels to visitors via this nifty device called the Pen Friend 2 audio labeler, which means basically the visitor can walk up to the label and put this device over the label, and it reads an audio described version of the label to you. So I don't think we're at the forefront of this stuff by any means, but we are trying things here and there to make our facilities as more accessible. The last reason that I wanted to investigate this topic was that I had studied Auslan, Australian Sign Language, a few years previously, and when I heard that the Deaf Games were coming to Albury-Wodonga, it felt like a bit of a sign from above to pick up the study again. So I did a couple of other courses in 2017 in preparation to get my skills up, and one of the courses required us to do a research project, so this was the topic that I chose. So today there are a really broad range of accessibility options available in the cultural sector, and I'm absolutely not suggesting that these are well funded or necessarily available as often as they should be, but there are lots of different avenues for accessibility. And even just flicking through the Sydney Festival program last night, there are lots of different sessions and programs that are all abilities or audio described, etc., low sensory sessions for people on the spectrum. So there's lots of different things out there, and Auslan interpreted guided tours of museum exhibitions are one such offering. And there are also a broad range of technology options such as captioning, videos, live captioning, and also various smartphone apps that offer additional options, one of which I'll touch on a bit later. So for my small research project, I was investigating the hypothesis that deaf people don't visit museums and galleries because they do not engage with them fully due to the language barrier. It was a bit of an ambitious project for the level of the course I was doing, and this kind of research isn't my area of expertise, so I would definitely do things differently if I were to do it again. But in any case, this is the hypothesis I was testing, and it certainly brought up lots of issues, and if nothing else, even if my sample size wasn't quite as big as it needed to be. So this was the topic that I was investigating, and I created an online survey which people could complete via SurveyMonkey, and I disseminated it widely via Facebook, via the Albury-Wodonga deaf community, and then I sent it directly to a number of deaf or hard of hearing friends and colleagues for them to disseminate as well. But the main respondents came from Melbourne, Shepparton and Albury-Wodonga. Participants were asked whether they were deaf or hard of hearing, their communication preference in relation to Auslan and English, how often they visited museums and galleries, which museums and galleries they'd visited, which assistive technologies they'd used, and whether they would visit more often if Auslan interpreting, video recorded Auslan and other things were offered in the museums that they visited. So it's, I think the value of a presentation like this is to impart a bit of information about deaf culture and Australian Sign Language, and sorry if you know all of this already, but hopefully not all of you do. I would just like to point out as well that I'm not speaking on behalf of the deaf community, and I don't pretend to be. I'm not part of the deaf community. I'm part of our local Auslan community. There's a growing Auslan student community in Albury-Wodonga, thanks to the Deaf Games, but just important to point out that I'm not speaking on behalf of the deaf community by any means. But Auslan is Australian Sign Language. It's a visual gestural language that somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people in Australia use on a daily basis to communicate, depending on which statistics you read. And it was only recognised by the government as an official language in 1991, but it does date back to 200 years when various British arrivals brought sign languages to the colonies. Interesting to note that New Zealand has recognised New Zealand Sign Language as an official language in New Zealand, one of the 3 official languages. Australia hasn't. Sign language is, Australian Sign Language is its own unique language, so there is not one universal signed language, just like we don't use English everywhere in the world. American Sign Language is different to Australian Sign Language, is different to British, is different to New Zealand, is different to French. There are hundreds of signed languages around the world. Many of them share origins, but they are all different. Sign languages have their own grammar and syntax. Auslan is not Australian English translated word for word into a gestural form. It has its own vocabulary, grammar. It's also not every word spelt out in letters either, so that's a really important thing to know when you're thinking about communicating with or engaging with people who are deaf, because in many cases English is not their first language, sign language is. So if you try and communicate in written form in English with someone whose first language is Auslan, then you are talking to someone who has a completely different understanding of grammar and syntax and those kinds of things. The last point here is the notion of deaf with a capital D versus deaf with a lowercase d. So many people in the deaf community and out of the deaf community see deafness as a culture, not rather than a disability, which makes it really interesting in the world of the NDIS when deaf people are asked to apply for funding under the National Disability Insurance Scheme when they may not think of themselves as disabled. They are part of a cultural minority. Auslan is central to the notion of deaf with a capital D for many people in the community. There are a couple of really cool acronyms that it's important to share. So CODA is a CODA, is a child of deaf adult. I am a nerd, which is not even related to deaf. So if you hear those acronyms, that's what they mean. It does feel as though sign language has become more prevalent or more in the public eye recently. The slide on the picture on the left is Drasana Levitsky-Gray, the 2015 Young Australian of the Year, who is deaf, and she did a lot to promote Auslan and access to Auslan. If you have young kids, or even if you don't, you may have seen Sally and Possum on ABC, which is an Auslan television program for children. Or The Young at Heart. It's very good, you should watch it. On the right is a picture showing an emergency broadcast in Victoria. So Victoria and Queensland in particular are very good at having Auslan interpreters on their emergency broadcasts. There have also been some negative press around sign languages. I raise these because it does raise some of the issues around sign languages. The first one was the interpreter at the funeral of Nelson Mandela, who was filmed, and his what he said or didn't say was analysed and found to be no recognisable form of sign language. So basically he was just kind of doing whatever. Apparently, this slide here is this is a bit of a cautionary tale relating to a county employee in the United States called Marshall Green, who was basically roped into interpreting on television an emergency broadcast. You can see from the caption there, he's obviously not saying mix up pray, but my reading of this situation is that the people he worked with knew his brother was deaf. They knew he could sign a little bit, and so they asked him to interpret an emergency broadcast, and he made a complete hash of it, basically. He didn't do it justice, and my reading of this is this was not this man's fault. He was just trying to do a good thing and in a really stressful situation, and his only crime was not being qualified for the job that he was being asked to do. And the ethics of interpreting, no doubt across all languages, but especially relating to sign languages, is that you should not accept a job for which you're not qualified for, because if you're, an emergency interpreting job requires a higher level of skill than a normal interpreting job, and if you interpret the wrong thing in an emergency situation, you may as well be not giving people any information if you're giving them the wrong information. So I guess we've all been in situations where we might feel like we're out of our comfort zone, and challenging oneself is very important, but not necessarily in circumstances like these. So those are just a few of the reasons that you might feel like sign languages are kind of more in the public eye at the moment. So let's talk about the responses to the survey that we did now. So as I said, the sample size was quite small. which was far less than I expected given the amount of promotion that I did for the survey and the amount of time was up, but that's what happened. 50% of the people who responded were deaf, 44% identified as hard of hearing, and 59% said that Auslan was their preferred method of communication. So 59% of people said that out of Auslan, signed English, English or other, they preferred communicating in Auslan, and 62% said they used Auslan for daily communication. 70% of the people who responded said that they would visit museums and galleries more often if live Auslan interpreting was offered. That is a person doing a real-time translation of what is being said in English, so an Auslan interpreted tour of a gallery or exhibition essentially. 30% said they would visit more if there was video recorded Auslan available in the gallery, and 52% said they would visit more often if captions were offered. So I guess those figures point to the fact that Auslan is a very important means of communication and that the deaf community value its use. Guided tours delivered in English and interpreted live into Auslan by a qualified interpreter, note qualified interpreter, or delivered directly by a deaf person who is qualified to give that tour, are offered regularly by a number of institutions, usually the larger federal and state institutions, but there are lots of other options, and these include recorded Auslan interpretation, so videos, captions, and apps like open access tours, which is operated by the Connect You Foundation. I'll just give you, if it works, a brief idea of what open access tours looks like. So this is one of the videos from the Albury Library Museum Permanent Exhibition Galleries audio tour, which has been translated into Auslan. Those Auslan videos have been uploaded to the Open Access Tours app, and people can download that content and use it through the gallery in the same way that they would use an audio tour on an audio device. Our experience at the Library Museum was that we had that content available from the 19th of January and over 10 days, which was the period of the Deaf Games, that was downloaded 202 times, and not very much after that, basically, which is not to say that people didn't use it after that, but we had a large influx of deaf and hard of hearing people in town at that time, so it really did point to the fact that it was well utilised by the community. And we've subsequently held 5 Auslan interpreted tours, so live Auslan interpreted tours, and we've had 12 people attend in total. So that's a really interesting thing to note in light of the fact that the sort of unofficial feedback we've had is that people, deaf community, don't like that app because it's seen as a bit of a cop-out. You know, don't give me a computer when you could provide a real person. But in any case, those are that's the experience we had with using this app, and we have subsequently offered it again for other exhibitions, and we are about to review our offering of Auslan programs, because we also offer Auslan interpreted storytime at our library museum, again, which has been very positively received by the media and the community, the community broadly, but again, attendance has been low. So we're talking about a very small deaf community, 22 Auslan users in Albury local government area, 15 Auslan users in the Wodonga local government area. But when you think about students, families, the broader community, and the wider catchment area of our venue, it's a lot more than that. So despite my small sample size and my being terrible at statistics and all of these things, findings and conclusions, deaf and hard of hearing people, according to the research that I've done, do attend facilities, museums and galleries and cultural facilities more often than the general population. As much as you can, offer content in Auslan and ask your deaf community what it is that they want. Use social media to advertise what you're doing, have a focus group, engage with those people, ask them what they want to see at your institution, and if you are seeking to engage with that community, you need to have an Auslan interpreter there so that you can communicate, if you can arrange that. There is currently a national shortage of Auslan interpreters, but if you can arrange that and you do want to engage with this community, then ask them what it is they want, because there's no point thinking you know what it is that they want. So thank you very much for listening, and yeah, does anyone have any questions?
We have time for one very quick question. Is there one in the audience? I think that we are running a little bit out of time. Emma, thank you so much. That research was really interesting, and I think for many people that has made us think about something that we necessarily haven't thought of before. And I'm absolutely intrigued that there are two different football codes of Auslan. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Karolina Novak, who is the education program producer from Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Karolina.
Thank you. Hi, I'm just going to set some things up. Do you need your phone back? Mm-hmm. Sorry, just bear with me.
And you'll see what's up there down here, Karolina. There, okay.
Yes,
And you can use this as a
Thanks. Cool.
pointer. Okay.
Okay. Hi. Hi, so my name's Karolina. I work in the Education Digital Learning team here. I'd like to start off by I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the land, and give my respect to elders past and present, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'd also like to thank Deborah for including me in such a wonderful program today. Thank you. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about a particular approach that our team has been experimenting with in working with schools and programming for schools. And this is hopefully what I'm going to get through in this speedy program of mine today. I'll go through a little bit of background. We did some pilots to start with a little while ago, so I'll present some of those case studies, a little bit about what we learnt from that, and then I'll go into some more recent experiments. So, sorry, I'm just recovering from a cold, so I'm a little bit... our first opportunity to really explore the co-design model was 2 years ago when the museum reopened the museum's Discovery Centre. So spoiler alert, those are the schools we ended up working with. But we had to design a new learning program, but more than that, we also had to establish new relationships in that community. So at around the same time, our team had been reading about co-design. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, there's just a little bit of information there. We were really interested in this kind of model indicated by the graphic. So the idea that the users or stakeholders in our case are the schools and teachers and young people that we work with, and the designers actually are us. So really, the experts in the content and in what we are offering is not us, it's our audiences. So when we started looking at how we could do this with these schools near to the MDC, we kind of thought we'd end up going down this sort of a flow. It was critical for us that there would be a public outcome for the projects that we would be doing. But we did kind of set off with a more or less a linear approach, and in the end, we found it was much more of a design process. It was much more cyclical. There are heaps of different models of design processes out there, but the idea is that we had to actually be super, super flexible. So I'll go through a couple of examples of what we did. So the first school that we worked with was St. Angela's, which is geographically the closest to the MDC. So, sorry, I just skipped over. Basically, we reached out to schools that had been to the Discovery Centre prior and schools that were in the local community, and we said, hey, we're about to reopen. We're a resource in your community, actually. We are here, we want to work with you, we want to know what you want, we want to design a program that is going to be really appealing to you. So St. Angela's came on board, and a group of teachers from year 3 said that they really wanted to work on HSIE, and what they actually said is, please help us explain the difference between a primary and a secondary source to these 8-year-olds. And we were like, yes, that's going to be so easy. We crafted, together with these teachers, a little program called History Mystery. And our intention originally was to really build on this and work across a whole term with this group, but it ended up ending here just because of the challenges in working between the two organisations on a longer term project. However, we also had other experiences that were very different to that one. So with Baulkham Hills North Public School, actually this was already a collaboration between two teachers, a Year 5 teacher and an English as an additional language teacher, and they were interested in doing an exhibition about Macquarie Island of their own. And so they were like, this is perfect, you're a museum, you can help us put our exhibition together, which is now quite a popular approach for schools. So because this was already two teachers collaborating, that really set a really different scene for us when we came into that collaboration. It was an opportunity also for us to connect with a real life experience. So we ended up bringing other colleagues from the museum along with us on this particular journey. And the kids had a really professional museum experience, which was really cool. So we started off gauging where the kids were at. So this is Year 5. Prior to the program, this was like their entry experience. This was all crafted together with the two teachers. So this is what they believed a museum was at the beginning. So you can probably see a few themes emerging here. So we then invited them to have a sneak peek into the Discovery Centre, actually prior to it being open to the public. So we were like, that's what you believe a museum is, you've probably seen some. We work in one, come and see what ours is like. We're in the middle of setting it all up. Why don't you come and see what we do, what our jobs are like, what our lives are like. And so they ended up picking an object each of their own that they would put into their own museum. So they kind of like, the kids got really into this idea and veered away from the Macquarie Island thing, and we just flowed with it. And the teachers and us made that decision together. So the kids all brought in their objects, and then they decided, we helped them photograph them and we helped them record some stories about their objects. And they decided that they wanted to share some of this with their friends and family. So they set up this website. And because this was an EAL, so English as an Additional Language project, this entire unit of work was based on writing, different forms of writing. So the kids did everything from object tags to object statements to this little blurb here about their exhibition. They wrote tweets. They wrote newspaper articles. Oh, hello, drivers and updates. So they did put together their exhibition. You can see it there. So we did end up having a showcase at the MDC where we included their objects with their object tags and their introductory panel. And so they had to keep to the word limits. We shared with them all of our normal editorial standards and everything. We got that text edited, and so exactly the same process as we would have. And they were so into it, both teachers and students. They even gave a curator talk. And one really exciting thing about this project was, because we had their objects in our museum, we had to produce a loan agreement. So this is a slide from a video conference with our registrar extraordinaire Lucy there, and my colleague Mark from the learning team as well. This is what the kids came up with that they wanted to put into their agreement. Okay. The fourth project that we did, how am I going for time, Deborah? Great, thanks. The next one that we did was, this was interesting. So this was two schools that were physically adjacent to each other, a primary school and a high school. And they had a relationship kind of thing that they wanted to address there. They wanted to really get across into the community that the primary is a feeder school for the high school. And they wanted a really nice story of a way for kids to collaborate. So the Year 7s actually came up with this idea to create an audio guide for the Discovery Centre. So again, we brought them in, they had a look at all the stuff, and prior to it being open, so it was a little bit, there were certain areas where they couldn't go, etc. And then the Year 5s and Year 7s formed groups and started brainstorming and got to the point where they'd written scripts for specific objects that they'd identified as interesting in the entire centre. Now, this was a really interesting project, because working together with both Year 5s and 7s at once, 2 schools, 2 sets of teachers on totally different timetables, working in completely different ways, was massively challenging for everybody, including the kids. It was really tough. So actually, despite the fact that we had massive support from both schools, once we'd hit all our first milestones and satisfied that first kind of chunk of the project, it was really difficult to coordinate the next set with both, and it didn't end up working out. The other thing here was that the teachers had already seen the value up until then, so this was a moment for us to kind of readjust. All right, our outcomes are different to the school's outcomes, and what we value will be different to what they value. And the teachers will already emerge with, we've done activities together, we've done writing together, we've done group work, we can present all of this to our staff and family body. So they'd already achieved all of the things that we'd set out to achieve anyway. So that was a really interesting one. Okay, and the last school that we worked with in our pilot was Crestwood High School. So this was a Year 11 advanced English class who were doing a unit of work on dystopian worlds. They were studying The Handmaid's Tale and the film Children of Men. And there was a group of kids that really was into this topic and really wanted to do something extra. And so the teacher was like, hey, this is a really good opportunity. So what we actually did, and this was interesting because this was completely learner driven. So we actually went out and had a meeting with the teacher and the students, and together came up with what they would do, which was, they got really into the concept of a museum as like a bit of a time capsule, a time machine. And they decided to imagine that they were archaeologists in the year 2116 who had just unearthed a 2016 high school. So they collected objects from their normal lives and then did this beautiful creative writing project from the perspective of a speculative future. And once again, we had a display at the Discovery Centre. And then the kids really wanted to create like an exhibition catalogue. So that's what you can see here. Oh, well, yeah, there's a photo of them holding it there, but I've just got some. So this is all of the writing of the kids involved in this project. And I won't spend too much time here because I know that I'm on the clock, but and later on, this actually this was a really cool story for us, because later on this project got taken up by ABC Education and they hosted it as a digibook on their site, so that was really nice. Yeah, we were very lucky. That was really, really cool and really awesome for the kids involved in that project. So I should be about halfway, is that?
Yeah, you've got another 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So we evaluated those pilots through in-depth interviews with teachers, and the teachers surveyed the kids as well. And overall, there was a super positive response to the museum's openness to collaboration, which was actually really humbling, as well as being really eye-opening for us. The teachers had identified the opportunity for PBL-style learning with real-world experiences and real-world outcomes. But on the flip side, as I've mentioned, value looks very different, reporting looks very different. And really the biggest takeaway for both us and the schools was that at the outset of a project like this, both parties really have to commit to the openness and uncertainty. We didn't know what we would get. We had to be open to something not turning out as planned or to something taking a left turn. That's resource intensive as well. But if we really were committed to the co-design model, then that was what we needed to really be prepared to do and really put our money where our mouth was. So there were some points of resistance, like let's acknowledge this. These projects are never easy. Some of you, Sam's nodding up at the back there. Hey Sam. So there were some points of resistance for the school. These were mostly logistics, time commitment, the school timetable, coordination of visits. Excursions are always a challenge. Incursions are easier, but still can be tricky. The planning pressures of the school, again, some nervousness around the open-endedness, so especially for teachers who needed to get approval from head teachers or executive. And there were general comments regarding the persisting rigidity of the school structure in general for these sorts of very open-ended responsive projects where kids in particular are really taking the lead. And, let's be real, on our end, this was a very different approach. It's very different to it's outside the kind of conventions of museum learning programs. And for us in particular, because we have such a large number of schools and kids coming through on a daily basis that we need to cater for, how do we balance that? How do we balance these sorts of projects that are really, really rich and really, really deep, but how do we work with that alongside the kind of daily engagement that we need to address, really? We're used to quite an institution-centred approach in some ways. And again, so other than scale, really, which was one of our biggest challenges, and scalability of projects like this, was again the anxiety around an undefined project plan and undefined outcomes. So, sorry, I stopped on a particularly fascinating slide. So once we wrapped up the pilots, we did actually have some conversions to programs, and we rolled those out. So we have a special objects program, for instance, that's now part of our daily offer, and that was co-designed with that Year 5 class, 5W, who created that museum. But we had to acknowledge that it's not always possible or appropriate to roll this type of approach into our business as usual. So we continued this model on more of a case-by-case basis. So these are 4 experiments that I'm going to talk you through now. So we were approached by Kerry Jane Burke from the English Teachers Association of New South Wales a little while ago in relation to our exhibition, This is a Voice. She was really interested in the exhibition itself and wanted more information. And I had a chat with her, and she'd just held a writing retreat at Q Station. And so I actually said to her, hey, would you be interested in putting something together with me for This is a Voice? And so we thought about how we could do creative writing in the museum, and we sort of built on that Lost Childhood project a little bit as well. So Kerry Jane and our team designed a set of writing prompts, which you can see there. It's just little cards, it's very simple. But we designed some writing prompts there to support and structure written responses to objects. Some are creative, some are factual, some are based on memory. And our day-long mini retreat called the Writer's Room was born. So this is, once again, a program that we are now running. And I don't think it would have ever happened had Kerry Jane not reached out to us in the first place, and then had our team not been open to saying, hey, you've got some really cool ideas. Another one that's been really interesting and productive for us is Crestwood Public School. So similar to 5W, this was a Year 1 teacher who said, I want my Year 1 class to do an exhibition. I'm just going to let that sit there. Some people in Year 1 are still 5. And yet, those 5-year-olds have beautiful and fantastic ideas, not only about their own work and what they're capable of, but about the world around them. So we just were like, yes, let's do this. How can we respond to this challenge? How do you introduce Year 1 to the concept of a museum, the concept of an exhibition, and the concept of curating? So all of the children brought in an object from home that they thought could go in a museum. And we helped them photograph them. And together with those two teachers, one was a pracky as well, so that was really cool because we had the classroom teacher and the prac student and our team all working together. We came up with this activity. Believe it or not, it's based on the maths curriculum, finding patterns and similarities. So the children work in groups, they have to find groupings of objects and justify their grouping. And they come up with some interesting interpretations. So I'm not sure if you can see with numbers, there's some money at there's some old notes, and there's also a clock. So I'm not sure if you can read that one on the left. It says things that open and close. This is someone demonstrating to me that the teddy bear's head is round. So again, we are now running that program thanks to being able to really prototype that, iterate on it, experiment, get feedback from the teachers and the kids, and then also see how that fits into their learning after that program. So they invited us back to their museum that they set up in their school at the end of the term as well. 2 minutes, oh my gosh. Okay, very, very quickly. This was year 1 and 2 mixed class. Oh yeah, so these teachers asked us to contribute to their history and geography mixed unit of work. We quickly discovered that 6 and 7-year-olds don't get what a map is. They think a map talks to mum in the car. So together with the teacher, we identified a couple of key issues and outcomes, and we put together this epic thing that we called Marvelous Maps. I don't know if you've been to, some of you may have had a chance to be to go check out the lab space, maybe not, maybe in the afternoon. We just went ham and on this space, just utilised every screen we could to kind of tap into that screenness of the making up words in presentations. So we zoomed into the area that they're familiar with and started to identify spots that they already knew, labelled them. Anyway, this was, again, an experiment, but now this is fed into our transport program, believe it or not, where we're going to look more at transport and place, transport and infrastructure. People and places is the unit of work in geography that we're now linking our transport program to for next year. And the last one that I'll speak about today is Jasper Road. So this was a super enthusiastic teacher who was like, oh, I'm going to bring my entire stage 3 to the Discovery Centre, which is quite small, and that's about 350 kids. Can you help me? And he got in touch initially for logistics, but then he said, look, I've got to do something with them, and he ended up sending us like his content and his worksheets that he wanted to do on the day. And we were like, look, let's, if you're open to it, could we work together to really craft something that would suit your group, and then potentially we could use it for other groups? And he was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So this is just a prototype, but this is what we came up with. He was interested in significance. He wanted the kids to start to understand why something is important in the first place. So this is there's very little content here. The kids have to come up with their own legend for what could make something important, and then they have to select objects, or they're invited to select objects and categorize them according to their own significance criteria. And that's where I'll finish up. Thanks.
Thank you again, Karolina, Emma and Adam, I think, for 3 really diverse and really interesting presentations that make us think a little bit differently about our standard museum audiences and how we can engage with other sectors to develop programs and also develop audiences. So please give them a big round of applause. And I understand now, Deborah, everyone is off to breakout sessions. Is that correct? Thank you.
So
Those who are going to the human, non-human exhibition tour with the curator or two curators, you go out the door, head over to the escalators and down and stand at the lift down on level 1 and the curator will meet you there. Those who is going through common good with the curator and designer, if you just walk across to where the common good sign is at the beginning of the exhibition, just near where we were eating. Those doing photographing objects, if you'd like to come down the front and sit in the first few rows down the front, and we'll start in a few minutes, okay? We've just got to get set up for photography